Hey Brian, you saw that I was able to get the active record thing to work, right?
I did see that. That is good news, but it's one of those that's working. I guess we'll roll with it.
I was explaining it to my wife, and she was like, I don't understand how these computers work. And I was like, I don't think I do either.
No one knows. They just do.
Yeah, I was gonna say neither do we.
All right. So it looks like it's 9 o'clock. So I'm gonna go ahead and get kicked off. Um, the first thing that I want to mention is that if you're in Denver, it's raining and it's cold, and that sucks. And I'm sad about it. So just in case you're feeling sad about it too, there you go. Now the real first thing was I decided to try to do something different with the morning announcements, where I was like kind of putting the calendar together and letting you all know the schedule. And I think it felt a little bit like duplicating information. The schedule is in the calendar for you, and so I decided to try holding off on the message unless we really had some important announcements to bring your attention to. So really nothing. Really no announcements from our end. I think the only thing that I want to bring your attention to is that we do have the job experience on Thursday. So we're going to take a break from our regular scheduled programming and look forward a little bit to y'all's future as developers. So that should be fun. Hope y'all had a good 3-day weekend. And yeah, I'm going to get right into material today. So today's class is going to be all about routing. So the last class that we had was on on authentication. And we're gonna take like a slight, after we do authentication, the next natural thing to talk about is authorization. And I'll talk more about high level about how those two things fit together and how they might be different in the afternoon class. But before we can talk about authorization, there's a tool in routing that we're gonna use in order to accomplish a lot of what we want to do for authorization. And that tool is namespacing. So today's class is just all about namespacing routes. As we work through this class, you might start to think about how could I use this in terms of authorization once we are adding users into our projects and we have different user types, like we have admins that can do certain things, we have regular users, maybe we have merchants that can do something, different things. We have all these different user types. How do we like make sure they can do what they're supposed to do? So you can be thinking about that as we talk about namespace in this morning, but I will just let you know, like if you have any questions around it, I might just deflect until afternoon class. So this class really focusing on just like routing. We're purely just focusing on routing, and then we'll focus more on how do we use this in the afternoon class. So let me share my screen. And what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you do some exploration and some reading on your own. Before I do that, let me actually just go ahead and drop my instructions in your channel right now. This will make more sense in just a second. Okay. So I just dropped a message into your cohort channel. And so the message says, use this Rails guide, and I'll go ahead and just click on this link and pull it up right here. So this is what this link will pull up. And then, so it says, use this Rails guide and Rails routes to answer the following questions. So the questions are, what does scope do? What does module do? What does as do? And what does namespace do? So for this first hour, we're just trying to answer those 4 questions. What do these 4 things do in our routes file? And so the answer to all of your questions is going to be here inside this Rails guide. So part of part of this class, yes, is about namespacing, but another big part of this class is us as instructors trying to encourage the behaviors that we want to see in you all in terms of being a developer. So to being a developer, yes, there is some knowledge that you need to have. You need to know certain things about the tech world. But even more important than being a developer is some attributes like your ability to research and read and play around with things and experiment and try to get them to work. So I've got 4 questions for you that you can use these docs to look through and find the answers to. Additionally, it also says use Rails routes, and I just want to show you what I mean by that. So I've just got the Active Record obstacle course open. It's just the Rails app that was closest to me, and really that's kind of proving my point that when it comes to like experimenting with Rails routes, for example, I really just want you, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in set list, it doesn't matter if you're doing it in quote unquote the right place. Like I just want you to play around with it and test some of your assumptions. So for example, if I run Rails routes from the command line, and this might not be something that you do very often. In fact, you might not know how to interpret this. So if during this first class you learn a little bit about how to read Rails routes, that's awesome. I would say that that is a successful outcome. Let me take 1 second to try to adjust my windows over here. So I can run Rails routes and get all of this information about my routes file. And I can go in here and I can do something like, oh, I see this resources syntax. What happens if I take this out, for example, and run this again? How is that going to change my output? With some of those questions, what does namespace do? Maybe I just want to see, like if I put namespace something something into my routes file, how does that change? So really, really trying to encourage you to play around with some of these concepts. Don't just like read about it and take it as truth, like read about something, but then go play around with it, see if it works. So I dropped those questions. I'm going to give you all, I'm going to say 20 minutes. So I'm going to give you all 20 minutes on your own to research and answer those questions. And then we're going to come back together. I'm going to put you into small groups for you to talk about it. And then we'll break it down as a class. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about what I want you to do? In my message, I'm gonna also put the time limit. So 20 minutes on your own.
And you typed in Rails routes in your terminal?
Yeah. You might also see it as rake routes, but that's the old way of doing it. Rails routes is the new way, but they should both do the same thing. Yeah, again, if you're not familiar with Rails routes, if you just take the next 20 minutes and you get familiar with what Rails routes gives you, that's successful. Any other questions? Okay, so the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to give you 20 minutes on your own. So I'm going to keep the Zoom room open. If you want to jump out and just not have like the sound on or not have the Zoom background distracting you, that's fine. If you want to come back in, if you have questions, if you just want to hang out here, that's totally fine. But we're going to start back up. Let's say we'll come back at 9:30. And so if you need to take a palm in that time, do that as well. anyone needs help with anything, I'll still be here. I'm just going to turn my video off. one more minute until we come back together. Can I get everyone to open up the participants panel, and can we do a yes just if you're here, if you're back? Cool, cool. Thank you all very much. Awesome. So I'm going to move you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to talk through the questions that I gave.
Hey, I didn't get an invite, Brian.
Yes, give me 1 second, Judith.
Okay.
There you go. Hey, Corey, let me put you somewhere. There you go.
You?
Hey, Tim.
What's up?
Not much. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to do some quick polling in the participants panel. Can I get a green check, a yes, if your group was able to at least talk about each one of the 4 questions?
Define talk about. Talk about in a very intelligent way or talk about in a very confused way?
You said at least one word on each of the questions, even if that was like, I don't know, or I couldn't figure it out. You at least addressed it. Okay, I think that's a good amount of check. So let's get right into it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a link to the doc that I'm going to be sharing, just so you all can follow along. But here's what it looks like so far. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Let's hear from group. Oh, now my Zoom is gone. Once I find my Zoom, so I can see the groups. All right, let's hear from group 1. So that's Garrett, James, Kira, and Brian. Can I get a volunteer from one of you 4? What does scope do in the routes file? Oh, Tim, you're unmuted, by the way.
My bad.
You're good. Garrett, you want to go for it?
Yeah, so I guess the wording is not there for me, but I guess you're kind of so like with this. To be honest, I don't have the vernacular right now, Brian.
Mm-hmm. What about so James? You've got your hand up. What do you think?
This is kind of my best guess,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like as an admin, we could have access to routes with our controller, and it seems like scope collects controllers we can have access to or put those routes in the controller.
Mm-hmm. So I think what you're getting at, James, is that like a lot of these like keywords that we're using, so like scope, module, namespace, all of them, will somehow like group our controllers together, and that's going to be really important when we get to authorization this afternoon. So I think just at a high level, all of these commands in some way are going to let us like group these group controllers and routes together. What does scope do? And I guess like another way of me asking this question of like, what does this do, is if I go into my routes file or any old routes file like this, and I put in scope like this, and let's take out module because we're just looking at scope for now. And yeah, we haven't talked about this resources thing yet, and we will talk about this tomorrow. But how might this change my output of Rails routes? Maybe if I didn't have this scope wrapper here, if I just had this resources article versus scope admin, what would this do? And let's open it up to any volunteer. Did anyone figure this out? Let's go to Danny.
I don't know if I figured it out, but my idea around scope is that, you know, if you scope like an admin, like you're still going to have like the routes that are accessible to like, let's say a user to like see an index page or a show page. And then when you add the scope admin, you're saying like, okay, at this point, I want these routes to be specifically accessed by somebody with this type of an authority that can edit, delete, destroy something, but those types of actions would not be available for just an average visitor or user of the site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you're moving in the right direction where like this group of routes, like we only want it to be accessed by someone with admin privileges, right? So you're on the right track, but I would say we're still kind of thinking too far ahead. We're still thinking about how are we going to use this. But I think what I'm not clear on yet is what does this actually do for us? So like eventually we're gonna have to write the code that says only admins can use this. But I will say that adding this in doesn't do that for us. We're gonna have to do some extra stuff on top of this. And maybe maybe a better way to look at this is like, what would happen if I change this to scope puppies? Like how would that change my routes as well? Leah, what do you think?
Does it change like the route prefix? Like if you had like a new puppy or something, you wouldn't have to put puppies in the actual route? Like it would already know that it's scope to puppies?
So it would already know that it's scoped to puppies. Not quite. And let's do a test here. So, and this is kind of what I meant when I said like I want you all to like start exploring and using this Rails routes output a little bit now. So let me just like model for you what I might want this to look like. So if I do Rails routes just like this, and another thing that I'm going to do just so I don't have to look at all this like active storage stuff here is I'm going to do -C and just put let's just put articles in here. Oops, article. And Leah, I'm not saying that your answer was like right or wrong, but let's look at this. Let's do this simultaneously and maybe see if we can use this example to understand what you're saying. So this is what the output looks like if I have scope puppies. Then let me just comment out that do end block right there and do that same thing again. So again, first one was with the scope. And second one is without the scope. So I want everybody to take a minute to look at my two Rails routes outputs and tell me what did adding in the scope do? What did adding in the scope change about this first output? Priya, you've got your hand up. Do you want to give this a shot?
Sure. I think that it's giving us a new URI associated with whatever we label the scope. So how you had it before with puppies. So it's giving us that new route pathway of like puppies, and then everything is associated with afterwards. So we have these dual routes.
Right, right. So everything here now is associated with /puppies. Again, like I put in this resources articles thing in here. We haven't really talked about that, and we are going to talk about that tomorrow. But I think for now, all I need you to know is this will create routes for you. So this will create a lot of our article routes for us. But when we add in the scope, it changes the URI. And so I think I heard a couple people talk about like grouping the controller actions together, like trying to make sure that this is only accessible by certain types of users. Like that is all going to be true. That's where we're going with this. But for now, this scope portion, all it did was add in, it appended whatever the scope was to my path here. Or sorry, it prepended it. So when I have scope puppies, it added /puppies in front of all of my routes. So let's go over here and let's write some of this down. So what did scope do in the route file? It prepends each path with I'll say it's an identifier for now. So for example, scope puppies will prepend each route with /puppies. So you could use this right now. Like you know enough about routing for you to implement this right now. So looking at these routes that were generated, if I use this scope, well, now I would just have to change my routes. They were going /articles or going to /article/new. Now we just have to make them go to /puppies/article/new. Or if I similarly change this to, whoops, if I go up top here and change this to admin again. It's taking a while. Now everything will be prepended with /admin. Notice also how it doesn't affect the controller on the right. So no matter what, I can see through all of these outputs, it's still routing to the same controller. It's just that the URI pattern, the path changes. James, you have a hand up.
I guess it's just more to clarify. So if we have like a article and we have a path where it'd be article edit, article ID, whatever route it may be, if in your scope you do admin and your resources is articles or any other beginning path, all following paths will require admin beforehand.
So when you say all following, I would say all of the routes nested inside this block.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so if we had a route where I guess it would be to comments and you would want to like edit, delete, add comments or whatever, if you have resources comments and the scope is admin, then automatically it will be like admin articles and then admin articles new, or I'm sorry, admin comments new, admin comments edit, admin comments delete or destroy.
Yeah, I think you've got it, James. And then if I'm you, what I'm like trying to encourage you all to do is like go try it. Like, okay, so I have this theory of how this would change my routes. Let me test that. Let me add in resources, reviews here and see if it does the same thing. I think I'll have to take out the -C articles here, but I'll just run Rails routes and we'll see if you're right. So now I can see my routes look like this. And is that what you expected, James?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So now we see everything prepended with /admin/review/new. And then another way that I might test this if I was you all, especially if I haven't seen this resources thing before, I would just try a regular old route that I have done before, like get to we'll make get/reviews to reviews index, do something like that and see if that also changes my routes. And sure enough, I see my one route here that I made. So resources is going to generate a whole lot of routes for you. You can still do your regular verb path controller action combo, what I might refer to as hand rolling the route. And you can still do it that way. So yes, James, any route that we now put inside this block here is going to have /admin in front of it. Corey.
Just a quick question. If we use that, for instance, like scope admin resources, and we don't use all of those paths, is that detrimental in any way?
Yeah, you don't want to do that. And we will talk about that more tomorrow. Yeah, as I'm going through this, I do want to like talk about this resources thing, but not quite enough time. I'm going to wrap up in a couple minutes here. Any other questions on scope? Luke?
I imagine if you were to reactivate lines 9 and 10, I believe, yeah, or even just do like resources, articles, comma, reviews. Would that be how you would do it all on one line?
I think so, yeah. And this is the example that it shows you in that Rails guide that I dropped you?
Yeah, I figured it would give you all the routes for that if you did Rails routes.
I believe so, yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, highly, highly encourage you to like just try these things and see if it does what you expect. Let's go on to the next question. What does module do? So we talked about the scope keyword. What does module do? Can I get a volunteer for this one? Alex.
So module basically is letting us know that we have to create a separate controller for this scope.
Mm-hmm. So when we add in module, I'm going to say it's going to change the controller we route to. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if I come in here, let me take out this scope admin. Let me just say scope module. What do we want to call it? Let's do puppies again and see what happens. And let me take up this resources syntax and just have our one hand rolled route here. Alex, do you have a theory about how adding in this? So you said it's gonna like, what I got was like, it's gonna change the controller. Can you be a little bit more specific about how this might change the controller?
Yeah, so it's going to basically, we're going to have a folder within our controller for our puppies. And then within that puppies controller, we're going to have something called reviews controller. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to have different functionality for puppies than what we normally would.
So I'm gonna stop you right there. Not a bad thing, but you're thinking now about like, how can we use this, right? And you're starting to get into authorization a little bit of like, well, we only want to make sure puppies can do certain things. Like, that's great. We're gonna take some time in the afternoon to talk about that. But for now, you're right. This is gonna like change the folder structure, right? So if I do my Rails routes now, and let's get a visual on what Alex is talking about. So I can see that it doesn't change my URI pattern. It doesn't change anything about the route that we're accepting here. So we're still doing a get to / reviews, which is exactly what I wrote in here. But now we see on the controller action side, now we see this syntax. And Alex, you did a great job before. Can you explain this again? What does this syntax mean? We're used to the controller pound action part of it, but what is this / part?
So what that's saying is it's basically, that's the action that's being limited or scoped to the puppies module or puppy. I'm trying to think of the right wording here. Puppy scope.
Yeah, and in Ruby we might actually call it a scope. We might actually call it a namespace in Ruby too. So the terminology here gets a little bit convoluted. But can you tell us what you said about like what folder structure is this looking for?
Oh, right. So what it's looking for is that like within the controllers we have a folder called puppies, and then wait, now I'm getting confused now that I'm looking at this. Yeah, we have we have a folder called puppies, and then within that controller within that puppies folder we have a reviews controller, which is strictly for those puppies. And within those reviews controller we have our index action defined and whatever other actions we would have defined. So essentially the index action within the puppies reviews folder is going to be, or puppies reviews controller is going to be different than what you might find in a different controller.
Right. So what I wrote here was it creates a nested folder inside app controllers. So what we're used to right now is for our controller files. Do I have controllers in this obstacle course? I do have controllers. So on my controllers that we've seen so far are app controllers and then a file. So like items controller, orders controller, users controller, et cetera, et cetera. Now what this module is going to do is it's going to point to a subfolder in here called puppies. So let's see this in action. Let's run the server. And again, really trying to model for you here, like, what does this do? Well, let's just go play around with it and see. So my Rails routes tells me that I have a route to get to / reviews. So let's try and hit it. Let's open up a tab here, and let's go to localhost 3000 / reviews. And notice how the error that I get is now called uninitialized constant puppies. Uninitialized constant puppies. Before, where we might have seen undefined uninitialized constant puppies controller, or sorry, what was it? Reviews controller. It's not telling me that the controller doesn't exist. It says constant here. And so what this is looking for is inside my app controllers folder, I'm going to go ahead and create another subfolder called puppies. So now let's refresh the page. and now I get uninitialized constant. So this is like one of those weird Rails things, but just by me making a puppies folder, it now found that quote unquote constant that it was looking for. So now it says uninitialized constant puppies reviews controller. And so I would make a new file inside my puppies folder called reviews controller. And inside this controller, I create class puppies : reviews controller. And that inherits from application controller. So now when I refresh this, it will find it. It finds the controller that it's looking for. It just doesn't find the action. So again, this is kind of weird, but it creates a nested folder inside your controllers folder. And all of your controllers inside that now have this, what I might refer to as a scope in Ruby. This is a Ruby scope. But yeah, this is what all of our controllers are like. Angela, do you have a question?
Yeah, just like a clarification. So the module, when you call module puppies, that doesn't actually create the folder, but it expects you to put that controller inside a folder called puppies. So you have to
exactly
create the folder.
Yep. So this module puppies produced, let's look at it again. Adding in the module produced, come on. It produced this output in Rails routes, which was the puppy slash. So Angela, I'm gonna try and repeat what you said. It didn't create a folder for us, but this was telling us that we had to go create a folder inside of our app controllers folder and put our reviews controller inside of that nested folder. So this slash is just like a file path. It's looking for a slash app slash controllers slash puppies slash reviews. Was that correct, Angela?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go to Danny.
Okay, so it's gonna, like, let's say that we had a bunch of paths prior to doing the scope module. It will hit those and look for the I don't want to say regular, but like the traditionally laid out controllers until it hits that scope module, and then it's going to look for that nested
Yeah.
area.
So by having this scope module here, that is what creates that nested structure. If I took that out, this would just be looking for the regular reviews controller that you're used to. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, like let's say, I mean, would there ever be a case in which we have like a get route that, let's say, goes to like an index, like for example, let's say that we had like that items controller index, but then we wanted to create like that subfolder, the scope module for like an admin that also has a path of index.
That also has a path.
I mean, would it or would it not? You would just kind of bunch whatever routes you want to be in that scope module with that scope module and leave the other routes out.
Yeah, you would group them all the ones that you wanted to route to that that scope. You would just put them inside this block and they would all appear together. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I will point out is that you don't need to use this scope and module. You don't need to use these keywords. You can manually do this too. Like I could add in like puppies in here, and then I could add in the syntax over here and produce that same route without the block that I had.
Is the block a better use case though for other developers coming to your routes to know what's going on?
Yeah, and the block is also better because then if I have 10 of these routes that I want to be appended with /puppies and route to this nested controller, then I have to keep manually doing this. So it is very advantageous to have the block where you can just group them all together. And you can see that the output that I get is the same. I can produce the same output with just manually putting that in my routes. The last thing that I want to go over, and I'll just go over this, is the, well, I guess the second to last thing, is the as portion of this. And I'm just going to say this and not really go over it because it'll be more important for tomorrow's class. But this is going to change the prefix. So in my Rails routes output, you'll see all the way on the left over here, we have a column for prefix. And we haven't really talked about what this column does, but we will talk about that tomorrow. But I can change, it will allow me to change this prefix column. So let's run, actually, let's do it without the scope in the module. Let's just do our regular old get to /reviews and route that to our reviews index. And let me do this again. So this first output, this first route we can see here, actually, this will be easier if we just do that. So we'll see my one route that gets generated here. This is what we're used to seeing. And the prefix, it's just assuming that this is called /reviews. I can change this prefix with the as keyword. I could make this as flibbity flabbity, whatever. And this will change the prefix to that. So again, what does the prefix actually do? Stay tuned for tomorrow's class to find out. But the as portion is going to let you change the prefix. Can I hear from the crowd? So I'm going to take this out and I'm going to keep my normal index route for my reviews in here. What does namespace do? So if I change I have scope and module and I have all of this. If I change this to namespace puppies, how is this going to affect my routes file? Can I get a volunteer? Travis.
Doesn't it just do all of the above? It does scope, module, and as?
Yes, it does. So it's going to does scope, module, and as all at once. Yeah, that's right. So if I do namespace puppies, we're going to see the same output that we had before. We're going to see both the prefixed route and the nested controller and the changed prefix. So now let's do Rails routes -c. So Travis, you've given us a theory. Let's see if it is indeed correct. And sure enough, it is. So we see our prefix now has puppies in front of it. We can see our path now has /puppies in front of it. And we can see that our controller action is now looking for this nested controller. Any questions about any of this that we've covered today? Again, like thinking through how we're going to use this, I want you to be thinking about that, but I don't want to go too deep into it right now. Kira.
You might have just answered my question with what you just said, because this might be too deep, but is basically what we just learned what scope is, module is, AS. You can do all these things individually. If you would like to do them all together, use namespace, and you'll learn the deets later on.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So
Okay.
we've got scope, we've got module. We can do them both at once using the namespace. The as is in there. It will change the prefix. So this is more of like the what, the how class, and then the next class we're going to start with why. Well, why are we going to use some of this? Does that help? Is that what you were looking for here? Cool. Anything else?
Thanks.
This is probably a good place to wrap it up. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap this up here. Let's take a POM. We can do a slightly longer POM. So let's come back at 10:20, and we'll roll right into the project kickoff from there.
Thank you, 10:20.
All right, so as you start to come back from the palm, please take a minute to fill out a quick survey for this class. I just dropped it in the cohort channel.